What is up, everybody? SysAdmin Sean here, and today we're going to do something a little different. So I got a comment, basic question from a viewer, and they wanted me to kind of do a discussion video of if I was going to become a sysadmin today, how would I do it starting over from scratch now versus how I started back when I actually started. And then they wanted to know my opinion on what I see the present and future of a sysadmin role being. So I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and I thought, well, I'll do it as a podcast episode. That kind of sounds fun. And what I'll do is I will compare how I grew up in IT then, or in technology in general, and what would maybe be different to do now in the same regard. So I guess when it comes down to it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with each step of my life that's been a technological milestone, if you will, or like a something that led me to the job that I have now and how I became a sysadmin, and then compare that to maybe what it would be like if I was that age then, but now. So, for example, we'll go ahead and get started. I got started in computers when I was really young. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and we had a desktop computer. I begged and begged and begged my dad to get one because we had video game consoles, and I was really interested in video games. And I thought, well, if I have a computer, I can make video games, and I can do that, and it'll be really exciting. And so our first computer was a Tandy 286. It was the cheapest kind of computer you could get at the time. It wasn't cheap, but it was one of the cheapest options that were available where we lived. And we bought it at Radio Shack. We brought it home. It didn't have Windows. It had DOS and like a Radio Shack generic kind of text user interface more than a graphical user interface. But that was the computer I started on. So if it was today's world, I probably would have had some sort of Android tablet from Walmart, or some sort of generic smart device as opposed to an actual full built computer. And that would probably be a pretty big drastic change just in the beginning as far as being a sysadmin goes. Now, I might want a computer and we might have gotten like a Chromebook or something, but if I'm comparing what I got at the time, which was a 286 computer that didn't even have Windows on it and barely had DOS and couldn't actually run Doom at the time, it didn't have enough RAM to run Doom, to what the equivalent version today would be, it would be something like a Chromebook or a really low end starter model computer that really couldn't do all that much, and you wouldn't really be able to do much with it. But back then, even a 286 computer you could do a lot with. You could take it apart, you could look at all the different pieces and learn about the different cards that were inside of it, and really kind of get an in-depth picture of a computer. And that's what I did. I broke that thing probably 8 or 9 times within the first year, and then I learned how to repair it, because if I didn't, it was going to be $2,000 that my dad was out, and $2,000 when I was a kid was a lot of money. So we kept that running. My mom used it a lot, so I had somebody to talk to about it, which was always nice. And of course, my friends all started getting into computers, and a lot of them were a little bit better off, so they had nicer computers, 386s, 46s, and they always had all the nicer consoles. So we spent a lot more time with them. But that was kind of how I got started. And again, if it was today, I would have probably gotten started on smart devices and tablets. And would that have led me into computers and getting more in depth? I don't know. I really don't know. That's probably the first hurdle I would have to jump. Now, if I was going to be a sysadmin, we'd probably have to jump a few steps. But we'll get there. I want to give more of a background before we get to what I would do now in comparison. So we'll fast forward a little bit. Lots of hobby stuff with computers. I started building my own computers. I ordered parts out of catalogs and had to wait weeks at a time for things to be delivered. Not like today with Amazon delivers it next day for a lot of times. And I got into that, and I learned a little bit about different kind of operating systems and things you could do, and all that. And then I got my first job as a tech support person for the university I went to. So, the call center job. You'd answer the phone, ask what the problem is, try to troubleshoot it over the phone. So I'm building soft skills here. I'm already knowing a little bit about an enterprise quote unquote environment. So I know about desktop computers and a domain and DNS and DHCP, networking, different applications that we need to support for the users. Learning things like documentation and scheduling and planning things and meeting with people. And that was all really important. I would do the same thing today if I was going to be a sysadmin. I would start at tier 1 to be perfectly honest. If I was blank slate and I needed to learn all the skills at once, I would start at tier 1 100% again, because of what you learn just from taking phone calls, working with users, understanding what users need, understanding what users are using. That was such a big, important thing. I didn't know a lot about, all the inner workings of Office when I first started. I didn't know about things like Eudora Mail or, TCP 3270, which was a terminal emulation program, because the place where I worked had just recently migrated off of a mainframe, or were going to migrate off of it. So they still had the mainframe around at the time, and they needed a terminal access software to get to it, and that was TCP 3270. So I learned a lot about what that was for, how to get connected, how users expected things to look, what they needed, all sorts of crazy stuff there. And that transferred really well into when I finally became a sysadmin much further down the road. So 100% I would do tier 1 again in a heartbeat. I would work the phones, work with users, interact. It's not pleasant all the time. Sometimes users are angry. Sometimes, they're frustrated. It stresses you out because they're stressed out. But, if you're able to help solve their problem, no matter how long it takes you, you put in the effort and you get it solved and they're happier, then you've learned a lot. And I still do that to this day. There's stuff that I don't know about the end user side at my current job. So from time to time, when an end user issue comes in, I take it just so I can learn, hey, what are they actually trying to do? How are we using that in our environment? I want to understand how this works. And that usually ends up becoming documentation or a bigger conversation with other people and them going, oh, wow, I didn't know they were doing things this way. We should maybe try to get them to do it this way instead. So, that exploratory research is really important, especially when you're a sysadmin. And if you can start doing it before you're a sysadmin, you'll have that skill really enhanced by the time you get into a sysadmin role. So I would do that again. I would be a help desk technician in a heartbeat again if I was going to start over from scratch. And then essentially what my next step was, it wasn't really it was a hybrid type position of help desk and system administration, because I worked for a library. So I helped support the folks that worked at the library, the librarians, all the different people there. And then on the other side, they had systems. They had stuff for interlibrary loan. They had stuff for it's called Easy Proxy. It's a piece of software from a company called OCLC that allows students to access databases and content without having to pay a personal membership. The university or library will pay for a global membership for all of its patrons, and then they have access to all this documentation, and it's really cool. It's a really handy little tool if you use it right. So I learned about that, and I learned about managing servers that had that software. We also used a terrible piece of software that, honestly, if I went back to it, is probably not that bad, but I don't remember it being very good. That was more of a metadata cataloging system for archival purposes. So let's say your library has thousands of photos of the city that it's in, but they don't have them digitally organized or cataloged. Well, this system allows you to scan the photos in, enter in metadata information about the photos, save it so that they can be indexed and organized, and people can look through them in different albums and stuff like that. And it was really in-depth process that one of our archivists worked with quite a lot. I learned a lot about how to do web code and making a lot of customizations that I really don't think we were supposed to do, but it was the only way to get it to work at the time with the way that that person wanted it. And that's really how I was focused on that job, was making sure that I'm doing things the way the customer wants it. And I would definitely do that again in a heartbeat. That sort of, if you can move from like a tier 1, tier 2 technician, like a help desk technician, into slowly an application administrator or system administrator, that's a great transitionary role where you pick up a lot of newer skills, but you're still able to apply the skills you've learned up to that point. And then after that, I sort of became a sysadmin, and I had very little experience in what I was doing. I just said, I'm willing to learn, and they needed a body. So I got lucky there. Now, back then, when I was starting, I was learning Windows Server and I was learning Linux, because everything was still on-prem. It was still physical. It was still application servers, database servers, web servers, all of this stuff. There weren't, Docker containers. I think Docker had maybe just came out by the time I was a sysadmin, but it was still one of those things like, oh, no one really knows how to use that yet. It's not really for us. Virtualization had barely come out. I mean, it was out. We had some hypervisors, but we weren't using all the feature sets that a company like VMware had put in. So I got to kind of hit in on the ground floor of a lot of that and get a lot of exposure really fast. Now, if it was today and I was going to be a sysadmin, I don't know if I'd even call myself a sysadmin anymore. I would probably try to focus on a type of position that's working out now called a cloud administrator or a DevOps administrator, because the role is blending so much. There's so much change from you manage all of these servers, which at one point in my life, it was, is the server on and the networking up? You're done. That's all you had to do. Patch the server, make sure it was online, and then give it to the end user whose application was on there because it was their responsibility to manage it. That's not always the case. And that can cause some pretty big stress. But now it's not even, here's the server, make sure it's on, make sure the networking's up. It's more, here's the hypervisor, make sure the resources are available. Or here's the cloud tenant, make sure that the resources are available and spun up. Just make sure that what needs to be accessed is accessible. There's still stuff that gets managed like Active Directory or DHCP or DNS or email. I haven't really ever worked with an actual Exchange server, which I'm told is a blessing, but I have worked with Exchange Online, which is a curse. But it's really not that bad. There's just not a lot to it. So if I was going to focus on today's skills that really need to be picked up on, it's honestly learning infrastructure as code type stuff like Terraform or automation stuff like Ansible, because that's going to help you so much with what I've harped on before, and that's documentation. If you have good Ansible playbooks or good Puppet recipes or good Terraform design, then you can literally reference that and say, well, here's the documentation. This is what that system does. This is what's on it. This is what it's used for, and that's all it's used for. And that's really big. I just recently saw something that somebody posted that's a bunch of scripts that will scrape your 365 tenant to pull out all the configuration files so you can document that. And I think that's really handy. A lot of places need that kind of documentation. It's really a skill that always seems to be lacking no matter where I've worked, is one, finding time for documentation, which is really I didn't figure it into my project like I should have situation. And then doing good documentation, not I'll write it when I'm finished. You need to be writing it as you're doing things so that it's all documented as you go and you can make changes as you go. And then when you're done, the final document is the fully up-to-date version of what you actually did. So that's something I would be working on a lot more if I was going into sysadmin today as opposed to when I came into sysadmin. And then, of course, learning all those newer technologies that are less about managing a server and more about managing a service. That's kind of what I'm taking away from the information we're learning about stuff like Docker and LXCs and stuff. It's not so much that you even care about the operating system, because for the most part, you don't even touch it. You just run a service that is that entire server and you just let it run. And if it doesn't run, you reboot it and it comes back. There's very little that needs to be logged into, manipulated, touched. You can have a little jump box where you dump files if you need to need to implement something, or if you have a new Docker, you just redeploy with the new version, as opposed to when was the last time we patched this box? When did we reboot it last? What happens if we reboot it? Does the system work? With stuff like Docker, you shouldn't ever have to worry about that. When you're starting to build more of a containerized environment, those kind of concerns go away. But there's still always going to be some stuff that's just not a container, at least for right now. But that's one of those things. If I was starting SysAdmin today, I'd want to be a person that could take existing infrastructure and convert it into more modernized things. So learning kind of the basics in and outs of regular server OSs and how to improve them and modernize them for more of a today's deployment world, where you don't really need to say, well, we've got to justify these 15 virtual machines for, our main infrastructure and these 20, this web stack of 2 web servers, 2 app servers, 2 database servers and all that. When really you can just say, well, that's one giant Docker deploy that deploys the web servers, deploys the app servers, and deploys the database servers. And I don't really have to worry about, did I install the prereq packages correctly? Did I document who has access correctly? Did I set up all the firewall rules correctly? You build all that into the project and you hit deploy and you know it was set correctly from the first go. So that's kind of one of the main things I would do today to become a sysadmin. Do I think the sysadmin role is going to stay around? I don't know, to be honest. I think system administrator is really a catch-all job title, so maybe it will. If you're a sysadmin, you do everything under the sun. You do desktop support, you do phone support, you do printer support, you do network support, you do backup support, you do server support, you do application support, you manage things like SSL certificates. A lot of times, the only reason there's ever really a division between like server folks and programming folks, or server folks and networking folks, is because your programming folks and your networking folks have a little bit more focus in their side as opposed to in the sysadmin side. But every networking tech I've ever worked with is also a perfectly capable sysadmin, but they're just also a little bit more knowledgeable about the inner workings and deeper layers of networks than I am. And for programmers, it's more they know code really well, but they can get themselves around a server pretty well. They're usually weaker in networking, to be perfectly honest. And sysadmins are always in this position where they want to learn more, but there's so much, there's breadth over depth there. You're so spread out with all the different technology that you don't always get to dig down deep into each technology. So that's why they've kind of created these jobs like cloud admin or DevOps or, server operations, cloud engineer. A lot of those kind of positions are more the focus pieces of different parts of system administration, because again, system administration has become so big. Like I said, when I first started, it was, are the servers on and is the networking up? Cool, your job is done. You are a system administrator. Good job. Now it's, are the servers up? Are they online? Are the applications running? Are the backups taken? Are the backups good? How's the DR plan? How's the BC plan? Is the networking all configured correctly on the inside? If you're doing software defined networking, that's usually on the sysadmins a lot of times. I rarely have networking folks dig into that too much, though our networking folks are getting there. They're actually pretty excited about it, and we're kind of excited about learning more of the networking side. So that's kind of cool. But besides the point, you're doing all these different tasks. Your support, your frontline support, you're answering calls, you're helping people, because most of the time when their application's not working, it's maybe something on the server end, maybe not something on the server end, and usually your desktop technicians can only answer 50% of the question. They can say, well, it looks like the application's fine, but something else is going on, so you need to talk to the server team. And then the server team needs to use their soft skills and talk to the user and find out exactly what's going wrong and troubleshoot and solve the problem. As simple as that. So will it always be a system administrator role? Probably. Will it always be changing? Probably. There's a lot that you can throw in there. We're focusing stuff on making sure that we know how different AI tools work, so that when a user says, hey, I want to use this AI tool, we can say, well, you can, but you have to be cautious of this, 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 and this. It's an education thing, but it got thrown on the sysadmins. It's something that sysadmin was asked to handle and tackle. Sometimes it's things like training courses. So sometimes you might have to teach a class, and that gets tossed to sysadmin sometimes. Now, obviously, there's different areas where other groups handle things like security, for instance, networking, like I said before, application people, desktop technician people. They all have important roles that are specialized in a certain way, whereas sysadmin, usually they kind of just fill in the gaps or handle the quote unquote landfill, as I've heard before. So that's kind of about it. I thought I would talk about that. That's kind of where I see the present and future of the sysadmin role going. And kind of the stuff I would do if I was going to be a sysadmin starting today, or starting from scratch today, as opposed to when I started like 15, 20 years ago, however long it's been now. But yeah, that's about it. So I thought I'd do this as a podcast episode, and I hope you like it, and we'll see you in the next one.